The UK is a big player on the global development stage, and Rishi Sunak's been trying to use our diplomatic influence on a trip to the region. He's been backed by the opposition, but domestic politics hasn't been on pause. It's been a good week for Labour with two huge by-election victories. I can speak now to Shadow International Development Minister Lisa Nandy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you comfortable with the tone and substance of our government's response to the conflict so far?
Well, I think everybody is using a great deal of care at the moment, particularly because there are 200 hostages still being held in Gaza. There are rockets still flying from Hamas into Israeli territory, and there is a humanitarian catastrophe looming for the people of Gaza. We've got to get the hostages out, and we've got to get far more aid in, particularly fuel, which has become a serious emergency. So I think it's right that the government is taking care in the way that they're approaching this and adding to the international efforts to get more aid through the Rafah crossing. And in that, we absolutely support them. We support Israel's right to self-defence and to return the hostages, and we support the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, at what is a desperately critical, difficult time where the world simply cannot afford to walk away. We've got to urgently step up.
I've just been talking to Martin Griffiths, the United Nations boss out there, who I think you know or know about. He sounded, I have to say, extremely depressed, and he was pretty clear. There's nothing moving today, and at the moment it doesn't look like they've got the deal to get more across.
I mean, he's right to be seriously concerned. We all are. Overnight, I had reports from aid agencies working on the ground that the hospitals are powering down for lack of fuel, that incubators for newborn babies are being turned off. I've had reports from UNRWA that they've lost contact with people in the north, but it appears that they're running out of food as well as having already run out of fresh drinking water. We've got to step this up and get aid and fuel in particular across the border within hours, not days. And I can completely understand why Martin is sounding very weary about it. But I can assure you, having spoken to him and many others over the last 72 hours, that we are absolutely determined that we'll find a way to overcome the practical barriers and ensure that that happens. There are, as you'll know, Trevor, very real concerns from the Israeli government, particularly about fuel and whether that fuel could fall into the hands of Hamas, who've been seizing what they can in order to fire rockets into Israeli territory. The UN is doing a huge amount of work to show that UN sites are safe spaces, to open up a humanitarian corridor through Gaza so the aid doesn't just get in but gets north as well. And we've been pressing our counterparts in government to offer more in the way of assistance, particularly technical assistance, in order to help make that happen.
That is a point that has been made by the government and by the Israelis. There are those in the Labour ranks who are a bit uneasy, and they think that without condoning or even excusing Hamas's actions, the Labour leadership, have lined up with the government in a way that is essentially lining up with what they regard as a true aggressor, Israel. Is Labour essentially divided on this?
Labour's always been a friend to both Israel and Palestine, and that's true for Keir, that's true for David Lammy, that's true for me as well. And the only solution for the Palestinian people and for the Israeli people is two states living side by side in peace. Now, that has become a very distant prospect, particularly for the Palestinians over at least the last decade and a half. The truth is, people in Gaza have been running out of hope. They've been watching settlements being built in the West Bank, illegal settlements that are making the prospect of a two-state solution very difficult
my
indeed.
Point, if I may
and the world hasn't shown the same level of care and attention to this as we ought to have done, and we're determined that that's going to change.
Your critics within the Labour Party, 23 councillors resigned, I think, this week, are saying that essentially you recognise that, but that, in fact, you're supporting the continuation of that situation?
Well, we're not supporting the continuation of the despair and suffering of the Palestinian people at all. I say this to you as someone who was chair and vice chair of Labour Friends of Palestine for a decade, and I say it to you as someone who stood in the room on October the 7th when Keir led the vigil for the people of Israel after the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas, and made strongly the point that international law must be upheld and must prevail, and has sat with me and aid agencies over the last week working out practically what Labour can do from opposition, what levers we can pull by speaking to our counterparts in other countries, particularly where there are sister parties, to try and make sure that water and power and medicine is available to people in Gaza. That's our priority.
Can I take you on to domestic politics? You scored 2 big by-election victories this week. But are you winning now because essentially the Tories are losing rather than you putting forward a positive alternative?
Well, look, I think people are genuinely sick of the Tories. I think that's pretty much the mood everywhere that we go in the country. But we've done a huge amount of work over recent years to show that there's not just an opposition to this Tory government, but there is a genuine alternative. We've just been talking about the horrendous events in Israel and Gaza, reconnecting Britain to the world, rebuilding our alliances across the world and playing a role on the world stage again, taking care with our economy so working people don't pay the price for prime ministers who decide to experiment with the British people, and investing in young people in order to give them choices and chances so they don't have to get out to get on. These are all things that we've been talking about very strongly over recent years, and I think it is starting to make an impact. We're confident that we're right about the future of this country, but we're not complacent at all.
Well, let me just put a little piece of evidence to you. You won these 2 by-elections, but largely because some of the Tory vote stayed at home, but actually quite a lot of it defected to a third party. In the case of Tamworth, your majority is pretty much the same as the vote received by Reform UK. Reform UK. That is the party that was set up by Nigel Farage, now led by Richard Tice. Are you OK that you're beholden to Richard Tice and Nigel Farage for these wins?
Look, our job was to go out and win those by-elections by putting forward a positive alternative about what this country can look like, to ensure that people in Tamworth and Mid-Beds have the representation that they deserve, and I'm pleased to say that they've got it. But it isn't by-elections or polls that determine the outcome of general elections, it's people, and that's why every day between now and the next general election you'll see me and Keir and others out making the positive case for the Britain that we know we can be after 13 years of decay and decline.
All right. Lisa Nandy, thank you very much indeed.